Will Brandon Aiyuk end up with the Pittsburgh Steelers? We talk about that and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast, your daily NFL podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher. I'm the host of Locked On Ravens and one of the many NFL experts here on our network, Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day and just a part of your day in general. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe, and also in audio form wherever you get your shows, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the whole 9 yards there. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free on LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are back. Preseason officially in full swing for teams, and football is back in the air. We have a lot to get to on today's show. We're going to be talking about the Brandon Aiyuk situation. It's been a very popular topic, and Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers will be joining us to get into if he will actually end up with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then we'll move into Dallas Cowboys talk with Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys, who has the latest updates on CeeDee Lamb. And then we'll move into Chicago Bears with Lorin Cox of Locked On Bears. He's back. Caleb Williams makes his debut. We'll talk about that with Lorin in the final part of the show. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. The Brandon Aiyuk situation has taken many twists and turns over the course of this offseason, even dating back a little bit to last season. Here to talk about that with me and more is Chris Carter, the host of Locked On Steelers. And Chris, the Steelers have been at the forefront of this entire situation, it feels like, for a little bit now. Obviously, they have George Pickens in-house, but not a lot else besides him and Aiyuk could come in, represent an upgrade in that group. But there have been questions about the contract that Aiyuk wants, the compensation it would take to get him from San Francisco. And Aiyuk, of course, has a preferred say in where he goes because of his contract situation. What's the latest on this from Pittsburgh's side of things? And how crazy of a whirlwind has this been for you?
It's the second part first. It's been crazy. It's been insane. There's been all this. The thing about these situations, Kevin, is that as a person who has to cover this from the ground, like I work for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I work for Locked On Steelers. I'm in the locker room. I'm in the organization. I have sources that have verified things to me. I've done that reporting. All of this, whenever stuff starts flying nationally, and it comes from sources that aren't exactly, verified, like Adam Schefter's and Ian Rappaport's, I always have to take them with a grain of salt. Be like, all right, this might not be a thing. This could be misinformation. This could be disinformation, whatever it is. Where I'm at on Brandon Aiyuk is where I've been since March. I think the Steelers would love to add Brandon Aiyuk, but I don't think that they're going to overpay for him. And when I say overpay for him, I don't think that they're going to give up as much as a second round pick for him. I think it's a third and some change, or it's less than that, because the Steelers know that Brandon Aiyuk is supposedly turning down $27 million a year deals from the Niners. That means he's probably going to want something around $30 million. And frankly, I just don't think it's worth to pay a guy that when you're having to also trade up picks to get a guy like that. And when I say a guy like that, I think Brandon Aiyuk is a very talented wide receiver. I think he's a top 10 wide receiver, but I think he's in the bottom of the top 10. If this was CeeDee Lamb, I think the Steelers it would be a whole different ball game. I think the Steelers would be coming, with some hardball offers that would be, really give Jerry Jones something to think about there. But with Brandon Aiyuk, I think they're willing to be like, you know what, Niners, if you really want to get rid of him, we'll take him off your hands. But it's also obvious that this dude doesn't want to go to a lot of the places that are making you guys offers, as he shot them down. So I think it's just going to be a situation of how much will the Niners want to put up with Aiyuk before this. I think what ends up happening is Brandon Aiyuk, they find a way to make it work. He ends up staying in San Francisco, which is what I thought this was always going to come down to. And all this will go away. And I just, that's where I've been. I've seen nothing to really shake my confidence in that. I know that Brandon Aiyuk wants a real deal from the team. Whether he'll get the actual deal he wants or he'll get just enough of something to keep him around for another year or two and then be on the market to score big there, that I don't know. But what I do know is the Steelers aren't aren't jumping up high to get a guy like this. They're gonna let the Niners figure things out on their own.
And we do know that Pittsburgh is a team that does value their draft capital. They like to build from within. They like to have guys on rookie contracts. And that's not you or I, Chris, saying that Brandon Aiyuk is a bad player that's not worth draft compensation. He absolutely is. But for a team like Pittsburgh, it's just a question of how far do you want to go with that, because this isn't just you're giving up draft capital to get a guy. You're potentially giving up a player in a deal that San Francisco might want, and the contract is a whole different conversation in how things play out. But with Pittsburgh's wide receiver group right now, Chris, do you feel like with George Pickens and then the rest of those guys, what's your confidence level? And can you kind of give a state of the Steelers wide receiver room if Brandon Aiyuk does not end up becoming a member of Pittsburgh?
Well, one, I think if you're talking about confidence, there's a lot of confidence that George Pickens is ready to be a number one wide receiver. He was a guy who was a serious threat last year, faced a lot of double teams, led the Steelers in receiving last year with 1,140 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns in a year where their offense was just woof, with Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky and eventually Mason Rudolph being the most productive of those quarterbacks at the end of the season. This year, they're going to have Russell Wilson and Justin Fields just be by default. That's going to be better. The offensive coordinator situation by default is going to be better. And I think that that's where the Steelers look at George Pickens and they say, like, okay, you can be a number one who takes the tops off of defenses. But the question is, who's the number two? And we haven't really found that been solidified yet. I do think especially Van Jefferson has had a really good camp. He's not going to be a guy that, is – to the level of a number two, the way Deontay Johnson and George Pickens were playing off each other. But I think he can be a solid option while the Steelers look at other guys like Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson to also come up into that mix. I don't think this is a Steelers offense that needs to have a superstar wide receiver to function. This Steelers offense, if it's going to live up to the build that I think it can be, it's going to require this offense being balanced, controlling the line of scrimmage, running the ball, using play action, not throwing the ball 50 times a game and airing it out a whole bunch. And I also go back to the last time the Steelers passing offense was, in the upper tier of the NFL. People think back to the Killer B era, with Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell. There weren't big number two wide receivers on most of those teams. Martavis Bryant had a year or two, but in 2014, I think it was Marcus Wheaton was their number two wide receiver as far as yards that year. Then in 2016, it was Eli Rogers, an undrafted guy that was just playing in the slot. And that's the Steelers can make that work, especially with them wanting to be a more running first team. They also have Pat Fryman, which I think is a much bigger part of this puzzle than people realize. But because of that, I don't think the Steelers necessarily feel they need to go get a guy like Brandon Aiyuk to make this offense be able to function. I think that they feel they can function without him. But again, if he's available, they're like, oh, we'll happily take him off your hands for, a third and some change or whatever. But they're not going to, like you said, the Steelers love building from within. They love drafting. And frankly, everyone's been very excited about these first two draft classes that have come out of Omar Khan's front office. Very, very high grades from the rookie season of the guys last year. And so far, the rookies have looked pretty decent in camp so far this year. So I think the Steelers are more than willing to kind of stick to their guns right now than they are to leap out of their shoes and do something that would jeopardize the future for a chance with a guy like right now.
And if we get maybe into the early parts of October or maybe mid part of October, as that trade deadline is coming up, Chris, do you feel like if the Steelers don't love what they see out of some of these guys, could you see them making a lesser move for a wide receiver that maybe is available at that time to boost their wide receiver group? Or do you think that they're going to just try to ride it out with the guys that they do have and make it work regardless?
Sure, I can see them making a move, but I think it would be a move like Tyler Lockett or someone that, Darius Slayton, someone that's not a big, isn't going to require some big draft capital move to get or cost them too much against the salary cap. Because that's the other thing. If Brandon Aiyuk had a deal in place where he was getting like $24 to $25 million a year, I think the Steelers, they're asking, they would be willing to come up a little bit more. But I think it's that huge price tag that's kind of mystically hanging over Brandon Aiyuk about wanting $30-ish million. I think that's what's deterring them. So if they were to get another guy, yeah, I think they would absolutely go for something like that. But I also think they've liked Van Jefferson so far in camp. I think he had a really good preseason game, and I think that he's fitting into that role. But we still got one more week of them being at Latrobe for training camp. Then they play 2 more preseason games. I still think there's a good amount of time before we see them commit one way or the other. But again, if the season were to start today, I don't think they'd be jumping out of their shoes for a wide receiver. I think that they'd be willing to stick with their guns, but I think they also want to see how do some of these guys work. Roman Wilson's missed the past couple of weeks of practice with an injury. How does he come back from that? We'll see. I think by the end of this upcoming week, we'll have a better sense after that Bills game, just where exactly Omar Khan in this front office is.
Chris is great. And for more on Chris and his Steelers insight, check him out over at Locked On Steelers and right here on Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll have Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys join us to talk about CeeDee Lamb and the latest updates on his situation. Stay tuned. A lot to get through here on Locked On NFL. First, the show is brought to you by LinkedIn. And when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to scout LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools you have to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And for me, I've had a ton of great experiences over on LinkedIn, whether it's finding jobs, networking, connecting. LinkedIn is the place to be. And LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. Even those who aren't actively searching for a new job might be open to the perfect role. And they give it a month. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Plus 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are back, our second segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Monday edition of the show. Thank you again for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day. Be sure to make your second listen Locked On Sports Today with Peter Bukowski, who brings you all of these sports updates 5 days per week, going across every major storyline. So be sure to check Peter out over on Locked On Sports Today, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up, Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys. The CeeDee Lamb conversation has certainly gotten loud over these last couple of weeks, and we're going to be getting into the latest on him, his contract situation, and more. Let's get into it. The Dallas Cowboys are trying to navigate their way through the CeeDee Lamb situation. Here with me to talk about that is Marcus Mosher, one of the hosts over at Locked On Cowboys. And Marcus, I know a lot of high-profile NFL wide receivers, they go through this dance. Obviously, we're going through it with Brandon Aiyuk right now in San Francisco in terms of a contract. CeeDee Lamb, obviously, is going to get a big one in terms of the next extension that he signs. But with Dallas right now going through a bit of a holdout situation, Jerry Jones made some comments about him, and then he walked those back. So what's a general baseline of just what's going on with CeeDee Lamb right now? What are the basics of what people need to know about this whole situation?
Well, I think the number itself is pretty much already spoken for. Like, I think it's around 34 to 35 million, right? Justin Jefferson got 35 million. You can make an argument that CeeDee Lamb should get a little bit under that, but we know the way these contracts works. It's sometimes the last guy that gets paid gets the most money, right? So that part of it's still up in the air. But what's holding up the Cowboys in CeeDee Lamb here are two things. Number one, the guarantees. CeeDee Lamb would obviously like to exceed Justin Jefferson's guarantees. And then it's the years on the contract. How many years does CeeDee Lamb want to get paid? Ideally, CeeDee Lamb would like a 3 or 4 year deal so he can hit the market again when he's 28, 29 years old. Cowboys would obviously like him to take a longer deal, 5 or 6 year deal. I think when it's ultimately said and done, I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle, probably a 4 year deal for CeeDee Lamb, probably $35 million a year. And then the guarantees are going to be very similar to what Justin Jefferson got.
Yeah, and look, we know how important CeeDee is to this Dallas offense and what he brings to the table, but you're exactly right, where in the age of quarterback contracts, and now we're kind of having that in the wide receiver conversation too, it's if Justin Jefferson gets paid, well, CeeDee gets paid after him, and that means he wants more money than that guy to be the highest paid player, more guarantees. So for you, you mentioned what he could get, but what would you personally give him, Marcus, with Dallas's timeline, what's going on? You obviously want him Dallas long-term. That's the goal.
Yeah.
But how much are you willing to go to make CeeDee Lamb a long-term member of this team?
I'm not sure that CeeDee Lamb is the best receiver in the league, but I'm also not sure that he's not. And for that reason, if he wants $35 million, am I willing to give up an extra $500,000 to get him in camp now and getting him practicing with Dak Prescott. Sure. I think ultimately if he wants 35 million and that's the number he's sticking at, give it to him. He is your offense. Like we saw it last year. This entire offense was built around CeeDee Lamb. He had 180 targets, give or take a few. It's a lot. And you talk about what he can do in the run game. He gets lots of touches in the backfield. He is their entire offense in a year where, Mike McCarthy's job is on the line. Dak Prescott's on the final year of his contract. I don't know that you want to mess around with it too much. So I'm perfectly fine with the Cowboys making him not only the highest paid player at the wide receiver position, but maybe the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL right now.
He is that talented. We know that. But Marcus, for you, this Dallas wide receiver room in general, obviously CeeDee Lamb certainly headlines that group. But outside of him, what does the room look like and what is your confidence level in it as a whole right now?
Yeah, so Brandon Cooks is the clear-cut number 2 receiver. He's had a fantastic camp, but he's an older receiver who has not always been the most durable. So I think the Cowboys are really interested to see who could be that third receiver. So far, it's been Jalen Tolbert, a third receiver out of South Alabama. He didn't even play in the preseason because he's had that good of a camp. I think he's pretty clear-cut as the third receiver in Dallas. He's more of an inside-outside guy rather than a true X receiver. So I still think they're looking for more traditional outside receivers. But I think CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, and Jalen Tolbert are going to be your top 3 receivers this season.
Could you see them going out? Maybe we get to the trade deadline or there's a cap casualty that was like, oh, this guy's, wow, he's released. No one was expecting that. Would you expect Dallas to be active in the wide receiver market during the trade deadline period, even before the season, if things don't maybe work out the way that they want it to with those guys?
I would be surprised if they did anything early on in the season. I think they really want to give Jalen Tolbert as many opportunities to win that job. Now, if we get to week 7, week 8, and it's just clear that he's not ready for that role, maybe that's when you see the Cowboys go out and try to acquire, I don't know, maybe a Robert Woods, like an NFL veteran receiver that can be reliable and consistent. But I don't anticipate them doing anything soon.
Yeah, and that makes sense. The young guys, if you bring in a vet, it's just pushing down the young guy, and you're not going to have the opportunity to surpass that guy. So I think giving the young guys an opportunity is a good thing. But for you, is there any way that CeeDee gets traded here? Is there any way that Dallas and CeeDee can't agree on terms and it gets ugly and he ends up, we know that this whole thing, Marcus, and the wide receivers and just these contract disputes, obviously social media gets scrubbed and there's this whole big thing. But is there an outcome where CeeDee is not a member of Dallas long-term?
I don't think so. I think CeeDee Lamb represents everything that the Cowboys want in an NFL player. He's consistent. He's durable. He works really hard, and they tend to reward those type of players. Now, could you talk me into an idea of CeeDee Lamb playing this whole year on the 5th-year option, and then next year the Cowboys placing the franchise tag on him and maybe looking at trades? I don't even want to say it's possible because I don't think it is. But if you do go down the road of not signing Dak Prescott, I do wonder if CeeDee Lamb, if you're looking at the landscape of the Cowboys and looking like, hey, it's Trey Lance as your quarterback playing on the franchise tag. I don't know how appealing that is, but as for a trade in 2024, I give it like a less than 1% chance of it happening.
Well, speaking of 2024, the preseason now is in full swing. Dallas just finished up playing their first preseason game. We know, Marcus, a lot of these teams don't love playing their starters for risk of injury. They take it the cautious route. But for you, who stood out for you for Dallas in this game?
I think it was their rookie left tackle, Tyler Guyton, who we had questions whether he was even going to play in this game. He's been battling a sickness or an illness all week, did not practice a lot. The reports going up into kickoff was he was going to be on the sideline. Lo and behold, he comes out in the second series and looks fantastic. Does not give up a pressure the entire game. I think it's pretty clear that Tyler Guyton is going to be the Cowboys' week 1 starter at left tackle when they play Myles Garrett and the Browns. So far, so good for Tyler Guyton.
Yeah, and is there anybody that maybe you expected to have a bigger game than they did? Anybody who you think now needs to make up some ground?
I think I was hoping for a little bit more from Trey Lance. I don't think he was bad, and I'm not saying that the Cowboys should give up, but you can tell that he's still raw and that he needs a lot of development. And with only 2 preseason games left and him being buried on the depth chart, I don't know if he's going to get it. Trey Lance is still probably a year away from being a year away.
Marcus gives incredible Cowboys insight, and for more on him, of course, be sure to check him out over at Locked On Cowboys, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the final part of the show, Lorin Cox of Locked On Bears will return to talk about Caleb Williams and his debut. So be sure to stay tuned. We got a lot to get to here on Locked On NFL. First, the show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience of four-wheeler winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain a vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has it covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. Or the parts you need, or the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We return our final segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher is still here with you on this Monday. Again, really appreciate everybody for tuning in today. Be sure to like the video, subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form. We're here with 5 days a week of NFL content every single week. So be sure, if you want NFL content, tell a friend, tell a family member. Really appreciate all the support here on this show and this channel. Well, let's get into some Chicago Bears talk. Lorin Cox of Locked On Bears will join us to talk about Caleb Williams and his debut. How did he do? We'll talk about that all now. Caleb Williams made his NFL preseason debut for the Chicago Bears, and here to talk about that and a lot more with me is Lorin Cox, the host over at Locked On Bears. And Lorin, we talked last week, DJ Moore extension and just what to expect out of Chicago, but Caleb Williams actually took the field in a Chicago Bears uniform in a highly anticipated moment for the city of Chicago and the Bears fan base. For you, what did you see out of him? Was it what you anticipated? Were there things you liked, things you didn't like? What was your overall analysis of how Caleb did?
Yeah, I think if someone just watched or just looked at the box score, you'd see 4 for 7 for 95 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, and say, okay, I mean, that's probably pretty decent or whatever. I mean, it's fine, but really impressed in a lot of different ways. And I don't think the scoreline there reflects some of the nuance of what he did so well. I mean, first of all, 2 of those incompletions were straight up drop passes by receivers that he hit where you want the ball to be, and they just weren't able to hold on to it on those plays. So, that's certainly not his fault there, but I mean, showing off the velocity of the arm to be able to make throws on the run outside of the pocket, taking care of the ball, throwing the ball away on a couple of different occasions with, one of them got called back by penalty, so it's not in the stat sheet, but he did such a good job of feeling out the pocket as well, holding in there as long as he could, but not getting out too early, but also not waiting too long and taking a sack or letting a play break down in some of the same ways. So it just felt like checking a lot of the boxes of what we were excited about seeing from him coming out of college in Chicago, albeit small sample size preseason game. We're not crowning him the MVP of the league or anything just yet, but this is what we were looking to see in the first preseason game and a lot to be able to build on from here. Yeah.
So to that point, what do you want him to build on? If you're Chicago, if you're the Bears, you have this performance, he does really well. What's the next step for him, let's say next week in the preseason?
Yeah, I think it's about opening things up even more, right? They kept, obviously it's the preseason, so you're not going to do your whole offense or anything, but I think they kept things very simple for him, a lot of the same types of reads, and I think you could see him want to get even a little bit quicker on a couple of those where it's he sees it, but it's maybe a half second late, so he has to move on to the next throw and the next read in the progression, and all these sort of little things where it's if this is the problem that you're dealing with in the first preseason game, then you are so far ahead of where you usually are with a rookie quarterback. It's all the little veteran type things and some of the operation at the line of scrimmage and stuff and the snap counts and the protections and stuff. But even that we were seeing glimpses of in this Bills game. So it's about doing more of the same things and showing us, the continued good decision-making, that he doesn't have to be the hero like he was sometimes at USC where he try and do too much. But so far we're seeing him say, we're just going to take the play. We'll check it down if we need to. We'll throw it away if we need to, or I'll scramble if I need to, but we don't have to do everything all at once.
And that is why preseason is valuable. I know there are always injury concerns and kind of that risk, but especially for rookie quarterbacks, getting into that rhythm and just feeling things out in games that don't matter. It actually does matter a lot to those guys. But with his skill set, Lorin, and what we know of Caleb coming out of USC, what you've seen so far through Bears training camp in this preseason game, what in his skill set do you want to see him continue to work with as we get to the regular season? What are some areas you're excited to see him show off, and where are some areas that you have noticed that you would maybe like to see a little bit of improvement as we get down the stretch of this preseason?
Yeah, I think the excitement is in this exact balance of like, he can make the hero plays, right? The rolling away out of the pocket and throwing across his body 30 yards downfield on a dime where it needs to be, or he can escape the pocket and escape a sack that you didn't think he could get out of and still find an open receiver somewhere, but not doing too much of that. Like, even just seeing Caleb operate the offense as it's supposed to. Throw the 3-step drop curl route. It's fine. Take the completion that's there, dump it off to DJ Moore in the flat and let him run after the catch. Like, being able to balance that. Like, I think that's one of the things that the likes of Patrick Mahomes and others are, like, the playmaking quarterbacks are so good at, right? It's like they make the plays when they have to, when they need to, when everything hit the fan. It's like, you got to make a play. You can trust that he's going to make that play, but they don't try and do all of it all the time. And that was something we saw too much from Justin Fields sometimes in the recent past, of like, he wanted to do everything and make the play with his legs and extend everything. And it's like, it's okay, man. Like, you got teammates here, and they finally have good enough teammates for Caleb Williams to where you can trust them to make those plays, and that they're going to be able to do things after the catch and not have to have it be all on Caleb Williams' shoulders. And then I think on the other side, it's a matter of like, it's the huddle, it's the play calling, it's the operation, right? It's getting a play call in from the sideline, getting it to the teammates, changing protections to the line of scrimmage, audibling, making sure that route adjustments are all communicated properly, because those are just things that they didn't have to do as much of in college, or in some cases not at all, that just need reps and experience doing it. And you're not tweaking that much in preseason games, but in the regular season, you got to be a wizard at the line of scrimmage. And I think that's going to take some time to just get used to all the different checks and adjustments that you can make there, and knowing when to make what and not to try and do too much there either.
Right. And again, that's just common natural rookie progression for a guy, even a guy as decorated and as hyped up as Caleb Williams. He'll have to learn that as the year goes on. But obviously, Lorin, this was Chicago's second preseason game, the first being the Hall of Fame game, which Caleb did not play in. We talked last week about some guys that impressed you over the stretch of the Hall of Fame game. Now, this week, was there anybody who built on performances? Was there anybody who stood out to you that needed a big game? What was kind of your overall analysis of the game in general?
Yeah, I thought the most important non-Caleb Williams development from this game was how well the starting offensive line played in pass protection in particular. Well, they were missing, ideally, their first choice. They have a center competition, but the guy who would have been the starter, I think, it was not able to play. He wasn't healthy, so they had to go with a starter, but kind of their second choice at center. And then that first choice at center is also like their backup right guard, so he wasn't there for either spot. So they kind of had their second or third choice at two of the offensive line spots in front of Caleb Williams. And the guys that were in there for them, Coleman Shelton and Matt Pryor, both played really, really well in pass protection. Pretty clean pockets for Caleb for the vast majority of that game. And when you got a couple of backups in there, I mean, you're nervous anytime Caleb Williams is going out there in a preseason game, but with a couple of backups right in the middle in front of him, it was like, how's this going to go? But really, really smooth in the pass protection front there. Run blocking was a little shakier, but the pass protection from them was really, really nice. And then I thought their backup quarterback, Tyson Bagent, was really impressive in the way he was able to manipulate the pocket. We saw flashes from him starting a couple games last season, but he wasn't really the star of the Hall of Fame game. It was their third string quarterback, Brett Rippon. But I thought Bagent had a nice bounce back performance to remind you, like, oh yeah, I'm the second string quarterback on this depth chart, not him.
Right. And I know also we talked last week about Hard Knocks, obviously the Bears starring in that. And we kind of previewed, Lorin, we got into what you were hoping to see. Obviously, Caleb Williams is going to be at the forefront of that. But the episode is out now. What did you think of it? And how do you think that they did portraying some of these storylines?
Yeah, I thought like on the surface, like it's just cool to get the NFL Films treatment, right? With Liev Schreiber, it was cool to just like have that, theatrical kind of treatment of this team. And I thought for the most part, they did a pretty good job of, weaving a narrative and being able to bring you along the storytelling process of Caleb Williams' development. I thought maybe it was a little bit contrived, just a little bit. Like it was true, but it was like maybe directed in a couple of different ways where it's trying to really paint this picture that's not totally the full picture, but it's enough of the picture that's not wrong. It's not perfect in there. But I'm really curious to see where they're going to go with our underdog storyline, right? Usually you find a player that they're going to follow all the way through training camp and wonder, will he make the team? Will he not? Because they started with one offensive lineman. He got hurt and is going to be out for the rest of the preseason. So they sort of pivoted to the wide receiver, Colin Johnson, who had a big Hall of Fame game, 2 touchdowns in that game, but he didn't play at all in the second preseason game because he's hurt. So we're down 2 of our underdog storylines here. I don't know if we're going to have to find a third one for the rest of Hard Knocks, or we'll come back to one of these guys if they can get healthy sooner. But I don't know. The HBO crew has their work cut out for them, for us to fall in love with another player and maybe have our heart broken again by the end of the season.
Lorin is always great, and you can check Lorin out over at the Locked On Bears podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you today on this edition of Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to, again, like this video on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, subscribe and follow along in audio form as well. We really do appreciate it. Coming up tomorrow, more NFL content. We're the Tuesday hosts, so be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.